I combine it with my Chicano culture of the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. So that's the skull, which the skull is not about death, but it's about life. Being Chicano, I have no fear about death whatsoever because the dead live with us. They are alive. They are always with us. My relatives, my cousins, my father who recently passed away will always be with me. Why? Because he's still alive. Alive in our thoughts and all that. So death is not something scary or we fear the symbol of the skull. It's something ancient, Aztec too. So I took the skull and I was very much involved in horror movies at that time. So there was a movie called Dr. Sardonicus, a mad doctor whose face was burned off and all you could see is just his smiling, the skull teeth. So I wanted to put a smile on my skull. So I had my Chicano, Latino heritage. I had the activist movement of that time, the Pimp Daddy hat and fur collar. And also I was a hippie. It was the drug movement. It was all the, so I took the zigzag man off the rolling papers, for the cigarette rolling papers, which was European, I think was French. And he had a 3/4 portrait view of a sailor smoking a cigarette. So I took his fingers and I crossed them. So I combined the posture of the zigzag man, representing my hippie culture, the skull, and the Pimp Daddy hat, and I came up with Señor Suerte, Mr. Luck, and started writing that out there in the streets in 1969. The drawing became too complex, so if the movie that was happening then also was The Graduate, if you remember that. There was a part there in the beginning that was talking about the future of this graduate. They said, let me tell you one word about the future, and that word was plastics. So that was really important to me because at that time, plastics were important. Remember, when I graduated from high school, the microwave wasn't even invented then. You know, so I used Mylar, which was a new technology, and I made a stencil. The stencil idea came from me from Mexico because they were using stencils politically. The PRI and the PAN political parties were using 1 or 2 color stencils. So it was a guerrilla. It was a political statement. And they were using it. I said, yeah, that's the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a stencil on my skull. Did a large drawing. On the back, I was poor. I was living by myself. I was sharing a can of mackerel. I was splitting it with my cat, you know. And then I used Christmas paper that was used, and then I taped it all up, and I used the back of it on the wall, and I started drawing my Señor Suerte. And then I stuck the plastic on it, and I cut it out. So my first tag went up in the winter of 1969, and it's in a spiral staircase right there by the Los Angeles freeways. Where New York, they tagged the subways, we tagged the freeways. They were a walking culture, we were a car culture. So I had this perverted morality saying, well, it's okay to do graffiti and tag as long as it's on public property, not private property. Youth mentality. So my first tags were on the freeways. And that tag, that Señor Suerte skull, made my career. It opened up a whole new avenue. Like I said, I am the longest continuing writing graffiti writer in the world. There was a few who started to cornbread. The first tagger who's credited for leaving the first tag, I believe 1967, 1968. But he was from Philadelphia and he tagged, and that tagging went on to New York to create that phenomena. Also, there was other graffiti writers there in New York who started there at that time, but they all stopped. But I continued. I took my Señor Suerte and tagged in my neighborhood. No, I did tag one time in Hollywood because I was working there at the Max Factor building, so I tagged the building back in the back. And it started coming out in rock magazines and everything else. Within 10 years, that tag became the symbol of the avenues of the gang of my neighborhood. I would tag down in the riverbed. I first started with my friends. I went to Chenard Art Institute. There I had a small scholarship in 1967. And then I went there studying until 1970. And until they closed it down and they became Cal Arts. But being a fine art painter, classically trained, I did not even consider my graffiti being artwork. During the day, I would paint nudes and landscapes, oil paint, ceramics, sculpture. At night, I would tag graffiti, thinking it was something else. It was about fun. It was about identity. It was about who I was. And there at Chenard, it was mostly a white culture. And my name is Charles. After World War II, a lot of us Latinos were called these Protestant names, Charles, Henry, Richard, Carol, because it was about assimilation. So they used to call me Chaz, and I didn't even know what Chaz meant. I didn't know it was an abbreviation of Charles. So later on, when you get a tag name, it's always given to you. I wanted to be Dreamer, but nobody would give me that name. So Chaz became my name. And Bojorquez, my last name ends with a Z, so I changed C-H-A-S to C-H-A-Z. That's how I got my tag name. And then once the avenues, the gang adopted, we used to go tagging down in the riverbed, these a couple of friends of ours from art school. But they stopped after that first summer. They got tired with it. And then, but I kept on going. So I would go down the riverbed with a 6-pack of beer and my transistor radio, like that, and a paintbrush. Because a spray can at that time was bad pigment, bad pressure, a bad tip. I had bad can control. I hated the spray can. So I went back to the traditional brush that the cholos of the 40s used to use, which in some ways it's a chisel brush, so it's wide and then thin. So it's a calligraphy stroke, very much like a felt marker. So I was still in the tradition of graffiti. But I used to tag down there, and then the gang started adopting, and they picked up that symbol. Like I said, there's over 1,000 men who used my symbol for protection. So I filed Señor Suerte. I don't commercialize it. I don't make T-shirts out of it, because they believe in that symbol. They made that symbol real and alive. And I do not discredit or embarrass myself, and I want to respect the gang culture. So that symbol will never be commercialized. That is special. I mean, are you going to make a T-shirt? Are you Italian in Italy of the Mano Negra? Are you going to be in Japan of the Yakuza? That's crazy, you know. So I respect the gang culture, so that symbol belongs to them. Belief is the real value of art, and that has motivated me, that's defined me, and that describes of who I am. Let me say something about the Chicano movement and Cheech Marin. Great supporters of who we are. He's collected Chicano art for the last 30 years, not knowing it was going to have any value because of his passion for being Chicano, being Latino. Cheech's father was a cop. Cheech was raised in, he had a home in Malibu. He is very much Chicano because there's no definition of being Chicano. Chicano is also a citizen of the world. His collection has been touring the world for the last 8 years. I'm very much proud to be part of that collection. He is a good supporter. Other supporters are like, my work has been collected in many art museums. LACMA and MoCA out of Los Angeles, and Laguna Art Museum, which collects the largest California art collection in the world. Also, I have many pieces in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and now they're beginning to collect some of my fashion designs, my Vans shoes, and some of my maybe a Nexus 7 design out of Tokyo. And another movement that I was very much part of was in the early time when I started showing my work to the Chicano galleries in East LA, there in the late 60s, early 70s. They rejected me. They said, Chaz, we cannot show your work in East LA because you're too much bad boy. Because the Chicano movement at that time was about family, about religion, about farm workers, about union, about border issues, about suppression, you know. It was all about those issues. It was not about bringing in graffiti is good. So they rejected me, and for good purpose. I can't deny that they were wrong. So who embraced me was Hollywood. So I went to the 01 Gallery in Hollywood, world famous. It was the most crazy bunch of alcoholics and and cartoonist and all that. The people who embraced me were Big Dan.